It's Thursday, time for Worldview with Denis Campbell. Denis is editor-in-chief of UK Progressive Magazine and host of Worldview on YouTube. Go to youtube.com/Worldview Show to subscribe. Denis, I'm very interested in talking about the horse meat scandal of the United Kingdom. For people who haven't been following this, let's start with how did this start? Where is the horse meat, etc.?
Well, a few weeks ago, a number of the major food production companies here had some tests conducted by the FSA, which is the Food Standards Agency. And it sparked an alarm because, and I think it was in the first case, it was with a large chain, which is Asda, which is owned by Walmart. About a third of the sample was coming back where it was labeled as beef, as actual horse meat.
Huh.
And as the scandal began to widen, every one of the major grocery providers, from Tesco to Sainsbury's to Waitrose, all rushed to get their foods tested. And it seemed to be mostly in pre-packaged foods. So if you had a spaghetti product with a bolognese sauce with meat in it, that should be 100% beef. But in some cases, they were finding it was up to 67 to 100% horse meat. And so that sparked a furore across ministers, because basically, just as in the United States, where the Food and Drug Administration have been defanged, the same has happened here with Parliament and this Tory conservative government. They've been very lax on inspections, and the food chain is not being as tightly inspected here, just as in the States, as it had been in the past.
Okay, so a couple of quick questions on this. Number one, all chains that have tested their meat and found horse meat, the assumption is that none of them have responsibility. In other words, this was just delivered to them as beef and they didn't know, or may they be implicated?
Exactly. I mean, they contract, all of the stores, just as in the United States, contract with suppliers. The suppliers are the ones that will actually package and prepare these meals for later consumption. But in particular, what we were finding was that in the so-called budget or value line in virtually all of these chains, this was where the horse meat was most prevalent. So that if and for example, Tesco, a shop that I frequent periodically, has a something called Tesco's everyday value line.
Right.
If you purchased a pre-packaged meal from there, chances were you were likely to get a very high percentage of horse meat as a result of that.
Okay, so do we have any sense of how this got into the system? And also, I would not assume that horse meat is necessarily cheaper. I guess if it's horses that have not been treated well and they are basically just put down, that would be a way that this meat would be cheaper than meat actually raised for for human consumption. But I'm just confused about the impetus here and what's going on.
Well, horse meat actually is much cheaper. I mean, if you compare it to sirloin or to some other of the high-grade cuts of beef, which you would expect to find in ground beef and steaks and things of that sort, it's roughly 1/3 the price.
Wow.
And horse meat is considered a delicacy in several parts of the world. I mean, in France and other areas. What we found, and this relates back to an incident that happened earlier in the summer, and it's also tied into the deterioration of the economy, was that people could no longer afford, particularly in countries like Spain, which is where the biggest outbreak was, they couldn't afford to maintain their horses. I mean, horses are very expensive animals to feed. There are veterinary costs, there are shoeing costs, there's all sorts of things that go into it. And in the downturn in the economy, most people found that they could actually get more money by selling their horse for slaughter than they could, they couldn't afford to continue to pay for their horse. That's part one. But here in South Wales, in the area which I live, the Vale of Glamorgan, indeed roughly 2 farms away from where I broadcast from, there was a scandal that lasted for the better part of a year and a half, and it revolved people from Eastern Europe, in particular gypsies, and they have a breed of horse called the gypsy horse, which are actually raised for their meat. And what we saw happening was, about a year ago, the horse meat market in France absolutely cratered. It absolutely collapsed. So all these horses that were being raised for slaughter they couldn't get the money they paid out of them. And we have a very notorious farmer, literally 2 farms over from where I live right now, who basically set his horses free. And it is alleged that he, in concert with several others, and these made headline news on the BBC and others, let over 2,000 horses just run free.
Wow.
And I have to tell you, if you've never seen it, it's quite a sight to be coming down these narrow country lanes and have a herd of about 200 unsupervised, unwatched horses heading towards you as you're driving in your automobile. And I think this has contributed, the fact that the horse meat market has collapsed, to the fact that they're now trying to use it, particularly these larger criminal gangs, in the processing of it. I mean, we've seen mafia connections, we've seen Russian arms sales connections. It's a very shadowy food chain here in Europe, and it's all led to this sort of thing.
So last thing on this, what is being done now to fix this problem?
Well, of course, the laboratories now are completely overwhelmed. Everybody wants to be assured that their meat is horse meat free, because if it says it's beef on the tin, it should be beef. If you're expecting to find beef, you should get beef. And that process is working its way through. But it's very interesting to see that companies like Tesco and Waitrose and Sainsbury's have all come out with very apologetic tones. The CEOs are taking full responsibility and jumping forward and making certain that the chain is clear. So I imagine in the next 3 to 4 months, you'll see it will, there'll be much stronger measurement. But the real problem now is with the various ministers inside of this government who dropped the ball. And there was apparently warnings about this particular issue 2 years ago that went unheeded.
Does this make you glad to be a vegetarian?
Oh, does it ever, my friend.
All right, Denis Campbell, check out the YouTube channel, youtube.com/worldview show. Denis, thanks as always. We'll talk to you next week.
Thank you. We have a very interesting clip going up tonight in which we're going to have a very adult conversation about the roles of sex and pornography in life. You might want to catch that one.
All right, make sure to subscribe, youtube.com/worldview show, so you don't miss any of the interviews and great topics. We'll see you next week, Denis.
We'll see you. Take care. Thanks.